Did you know that every 36 minutes, the Indian education system claims another victim? Not a soldier, not someone in a war zone, a student. Someone sitting exactly where you once sat. In 2024, official government records, the NCRB data, revealed a devastating reality. 14,488 students were lost to a mental health crisis. That is approximately 9% of all such tragedies across the country. And that number rose by more than 4% from the year before. Not falling, rising every single year. To put that in perspective, 14,488 students. That is more than the entire graduating batch of India's top 10 IITs combined, gone in 1 year. And yet, India has 260 million students, the second largest education system ever built. We produce more engineers and doctors than almost any nation on earth. By every headline, this should be a success story. So why, in 2024, did the Supreme Court of India look at the same system and call it a trail of student distress and institutional exploitation? Is India's education system, the one built to create a superpower, quietly becoming a machine that breaks its own children? That is the question we are going to answer today, with government data, with court records, with facts. Because 14,488 students deserve more than a statistic. They deserve an answer. To understand why this machine is breaking, we first need to understand how it's built. India's education ecosystem runs on three distinct tracks: formal, vocational, and non-formal. Let's start with the one we all know, formal education. This is the traditional hunt for a degree, the schools, the colleges, the relentless exam cycles. Just like most of the world, it's split into two arenas, K through 12 and higher education. For decades, K through 12 followed a rigid 10+2 structure. But the National Education Policy completely rewrote the playbook, shifting us to a 5+3+3+4 model. It covers 15 years of a student's life, from a 3-year-old toddler to an 18-year-old adult. Only after surviving this 15-year package can you finally unlock the door to higher education. Then there is vocational training. This is supposed to be the bridge to the real world, focusing on hands-on, practical skills rather than memorizing textbooks. Historically, students only tasted this during college to get ready for actual jobs. For example, during my own college days, I did my 3 months of vocational training inside a massive steel plant. I was on the ground, learning the chaos of blast furnaces, coke ovens, and rolling mills. That was where the theory actually met reality. Today, India is trying to spark that realism much earlier, integrating vocational skills right from the 6th grade. And finally, there is non-formal or distance education. Think of this as the safety valve of the system. It acts as a parallel, legally equivalent path designed for maximum flexibility, built specifically for working professionals and students in rural areas who can't sit in a traditional classroom every day. On paper, this 3-part blueprint looks flawless. It's structured, it's flexible, and it's massive. So where exactly does the engine start to fail? To really see where this whole system starts going off the rails, you have to look at the very beginning. And honestly, I don't even need to show you a spreadsheet for this. I just look at my own life. Let's go back to around 1999, when I was 4 and was getting enrolled into kindergarten. I vividly remember having to pass an enrollment test just to get in. I had to point out shapes, identify colors, and name animals just to prove a 4-year-old was worthy of a plastic chair. And 2 years later, that exact same cycle repeated. I remember my dad being so incredibly worried about getting me into a decent English medium school for grade 1. He literally had to go around begging different school teachers for a reference just so we could get permission to apply for an entrance test. And all that for a 6-year-old? Talk about a brilliant way to kill the natural curiosity of a child. At that age, you absorb your parents' anxiety like a sponge. And if you face rejection, you internalize this feeling of not being good enough before you even know how to ride a bicycle. You damage a child's self-worth at the most foundational stage of their life. And the wildest part? The law knows this is wrong. NCERT guidelines explicitly state that children aged 3 to 6 should never be labeled as pass or fail. In fact, in 2009, under the Right to Education Act, the government strictly banned schools from using these screening tests to filter little kids. But there's a massive loophole. The RTE Act's ban on screening doesn't apply to the unreserved general category seats in private, unaided preschools. So to this day, private schools can legally tag a 3-year-old as a failure for 75% of their seats. But hey, after all that fighting and begging and stressing, you'd think there must be some kind of magic waiting for you inside those classrooms, right? But looking back, my core memories of that time are incredibly simple. I remember running around the playground. I remember the absolute embarrassment of accidentally pooping in the middle of class. But what I don't remember? A single creative learning activity. Not one. We fought a war just to get into a room that taught us absolutely nothing about how to think. To be completely honest, all the way until grade 3, I had no clue what was going on. Some of our teachers were local housewives who literally used to knit sweaters in the back of the room while we took turns reading paragraphs out loud one by one. Now, look, not everything was bad. There were a few teachers who genuinely cared, and I still remember the stories and poems from Hindi and English classes that actually caught my interest. But everything changed in grade 4. Suddenly, school became exciting, and it was all because of just one person, my English teacher, who also happened to be my class teacher. She completely broke down the walls of that traditional classroom. She traveled to Europe a few times, and she brought those global ideas back with her. She had us forming groups, learning rhymes, and dressing up in costumes to play different characters for classroom dramas. There were so many laughs, so much actual learning, and we even got to perform on stage. None of this was in the official school syllabus, but it was the first time I actually had a reason to go to school other than just meeting up with my friends. Looking back, those early school years exposed the 3 fundamental flaws of the Indian education system. First, on one hand, you have underqualified staff literally knitting sweaters while kids mindlessly read aloud. On the other, you have rare, passionate educators who practically have to smuggle in creativity from abroad because our curriculum completely ignores it. Second, the system didn't care about my confidence, public speaking, or teamwork. The only reason I experienced those things was because one teacher chose to step outside the textbook. Without her, the school was perfectly happy letting us memorize chapters just to clear an exam. And third, we put panicked parents through absolute hell, making them beg for references just to secure a seat. But the irony is, once you get inside those gates, the actual quality of learning is hollow. We chase the prestigious label, but completely ignore the education. Now, you might think things have changed since I was a kid. We have the National Education Policy, we have smart boards, we have iPads in classrooms. Surely, in 2026, the system has evolved. Hardly. In May 2026, Niti Aayog released a landmark policy report analyzing a decade of school education data in India. The findings are a devastating reality check. Despite all the technological hype, the report reveals that 35% of grade 5 students were completely unable to read a basic Class 2 text. Read that again. And when it comes to basic math, over 60% of them fail to solve a simple division problem. We are just failing to teach children how to think. We are failing to teach them baseline literacy. And yet, while the actual quality of learning has plummeted, the financial costs of this broken system has skyrocketed into the stratosphere. If you look at the private school ecosystem today, it is fractured into an absurd class hierarchy. Think about the sheer madness of these numbers. Families are draining their life savings, sacrificing their financial security, and entering a state of perpetual anxiety, all to buy a ticket into an elite English medium school. And what does that crippling financial sacrifice actually buy them? A front row seat to a national epidemic. I am dwelling on this foundational level because it is, without a doubt, the most critical part of the entire human journey. Economists, policymakers, and global institutions like the World Bank widely agree, if you break the foundation, you break the future. The Nobel Prize-winning economist James Heckman fundamentally proved this with his lifetime of research. He showed that investing in early childhood education yields the absolute highest economic return a country can ask for, up to a massive 13% return per year. No later stage of life, not college, not high school, not corporate upskilling, comes close to that payoff. Because education is a cumulative pyramid, if a country fails its children at the K-5 level, the pipeline leaks forever. A child who is mathematically locked out of understanding basic reading at age 9 stands zero chance of surviving middle school science, high school history, or college engineering. You simply cannot build an advanced tech economy on a foundation of sand. Before we judge how India's education system impacted the country, we need to find the right measuring stick. In modern times, if there is a golden standard for education, it has to be Europe, right? Especially the Nordic countries? But let's be honest, that comparison isn't fair. Not yet. The most honest mirror for India is China. For nearly 1,800 years, from the time of Christ to the Industrial Revolution, India and China were not developing nations. They were the world economy. Together, they commanded nearly half of global GDP. These were not poor countries. These were the richest civilizations on Earth. Then came the West, and then came colonization. Both nations were systematically stripped, their industries dismantled, their economies hollowed out, their people left behind. By the time the British finally left India in 1947, and China emerged from what it calls its century of humiliation, both nations stood at the exact same starting line: absolute poverty and a literacy rate of just 15 to 20%. Same wound, same starting point. Two countries, one fork in the road. In this new industrial world, literacy was no longer a luxury, it was survival. Both nations knew this. Both nations made a choice. And those two choices could not have been more different. Nehru looked at a country where 85% of people could not read a single line of text and decided the priority should be world-class higher education. Think about that for a moment. Look at it this way. Suppose you have a room of 20 students. Only 3 of them have the foundational background to even apply for an IIT, while the other 17 are completely locked out. Are you really sure those IITs contain the absolute best, most deserving minds in the country? Because the way I see it, those other 17 minds were never even allowed to participate. And this is why whenever the child of a daily wage laborer or a rickshaw puller cracks IIT, the entire country treats it like a miracle. Because it is. Not because that child wasn't brilliant enough, but because we built a system that crushed every path that could have led them there and then acted surprised when they arrived anyway. China made the opposite bet. Instead of building cathedrals at the top, they decided to lay the foundation first. Government campaigns went into villages, into fields, into factories, teaching millions of peasants how to read. They simplified their written language so it could be learned faster. They built schools where there were none. They measured success not by the rank of their best university, but by the literacy of their last village. It was slow. It was unglamorous. It made no headlines. But by the 1980s, something extraordinary had happened quietly. By the 1980s, World Bank data showed that India and China were still both incredibly poor. In fact, India's GDP per capita was actually slightly higher than China's. On paper, India was ahead. But underneath that number, China had built something India hadn't: a workforce. Hundreds of millions of literate, disciplined workers ready to plug into any factory, follow any instruction, build anything the world wanted to buy. When Deng Xiaoping opened China's economy, the infrastructure was already there. The people were ready. China didn't become the factory of the world by accident. It became the factory of the world because it spent 30 years building the workers first. India, in 1991, when we finally opened our own economy, was not ready for that. Our mass labor force was still constrained, still undereducated, still locked out of the system Nehru had built past them. So instead of manufacturing, we built services, IT, software, pharmaceuticals, and our elite, the top 15%, did extraordinarily well. But a service economy cannot employ hundreds of millions of agricultural workers who were never given the tools to participate. And so, between 1980 and 2000, the gap inside India did not close, it widened. Same starting line, 2 choices, 2 completely different countries. And India is still living with the consequences of the choice that was made before most of us were born. For centuries, India was divided by caste. You were born into your place, and you stayed there. Today, we tell ourselves that is over. Today, we say anyone can rise, that the ladder is open, that education is the great equalizer. But here's what we don't say out loud. The ladder exists. But someone has turned it into a business, and the people running that business are not interested in you climbing. They are interested in how much you will pay just to try. We come from a civilization where the Gurukul system ran entirely on community donation. Education was sacred. It was deliberately kept separate from profit. Today, education is arguably the most ruthless, most unregulated business in India. When the government stepped back, the market stepped in. And the market did what markets do. It smelled the desperation and it priced accordingly. In the last 10 years alone, over 89,000 government schools were shut down or merged. The share of students in government schools fell from 71% in 2005 to under 49% today. Millions of families not choosing private education, being pushed into it. Because every parent in India knows the unspoken rule. Enroll your child in an average government school and you are setting them up to lose. The result? The private education market in India has grown 5 times over in just 2 decades. 5 times! That is not a market, that is a gold rush. And wherever there is a gold rush, there are people willing to do anything to get their share. Let me tell you something I saw myself. When I was in grade 7, 45 out of 53 students in my class were deliberately failed by our maths teacher. The 8 who passed, they were all taking private tuitions from that same teacher. Grade 8, same thing. I remember sitting with my friends, all of us quietly panicking, not about the exam, about how to tell our parents, about how to ask for the money. This was not a rogue teacher, this was a system. The entire school knew, the entire school was part of it. Teachers would deliberately not teach in class. They would reveal exam questions only in their private tuitions, and then watch the results speak for themselves. That was one school, one city, 1 decade ago. Today, the scale of it has grown beyond what I could have imagined then. Let me show you exactly what a Class 12 science student faces today. First, school fees, non-negotiable, non-transparent. You need the degree. Governance is almost non-existent. You pay. Then the school's book list, not the standardized government-approved books every child has a legal right to use. Private publisher bundles, thousands of rupees, non-returnable, non-reusable. The school gets a kickback. The family gets the bill. Try buying those books from an outside vendor? Parents across India are reporting open humiliation by school administrations for doing exactly that. It is not policy, it is enforcement. Then, the private tuitions. Because the teacher won't teach in class. You already know why. Then, the JEE or NEET coaching. Because the school wasn't enough. Because you still want to try your luck in this lottery. And the coaching center sells you their own study materials on top. Add it all up. By the time you are done, you have paid for school, for books the school mandated, for tuitions the teacher made necessary, for coaching the school made essential, for materials the coaching sold you separately, to acquire exactly the skills that your school alone should have given you. That is not a system. That is extortion, structured, normalized, invisible. And after all of that, after every rupee drained, every year of pressure, every parent who skipped a meal so their child could attend that coaching class, the student sits down in the exam hall. 3 years of preparation, 1 shot at everything, not knowing that somewhere in that room, the seat next to them may have already been bought. Question papers, stolen. Sold for 10 lakh rupees to 50 lakh rupees per student. Distributed through encrypted apps. Solved in hidden hotel rooms, hours before the exam. The competition was never fair. It was never a meritocracy. It was a performance of one. You know what China did when it began facing similar pressures? The government intervened directly, decisively. Private educational companies were legally forced to stop teaching school subjects entirely, pivot to adult upskilling, vocational training, overseas markets. The predatory coaching industry dismantled by policy in one move. India did not do that. Instead, we let it grow. We let it organize. We let it entrench. Until investigators, courts, and journalists all started using the same word for it: the education mafia. The national education policy exists. The new anti-cheating laws exist. The coaching center guidelines exist, and they matter. Some of them are real steps forward. But here is the uncomfortable truth. A mafia that is worth billions of rupees, that has roots inside exam boards, inside universities, and inside the textbook supply chain, does not dismantle itself just because of a new government circular. So while the system reforms itself, slowly, imperfectly, and on its own timeline, what do you do right now, today, as a student or as a parent? That is the only question worth answering. Here is something the coaching centers and the private school mafias absolutely do not want you to understand. The threat they have held over you for decades, without our degree, you will get nothing, that threat is dying. In India, Zoho has built a billion-dollar global tech company by actively ignoring college degrees. They hire straight out of high school. They train in-house. They don't care where you studied. They only care what you can do. Globally, giants like Google, Apple, IBM, and Tesla have officially removed degree requirements for massive portions of their workforce. The gate they were charging you to enter is no longer the only gate. And I can tell you this personally. I graduated with a mechanical engineering degree in 2016. I have never collected it. I don't even have all my mark sheets. Whenever HR teams ask about it during background verification, I tell them I was just too lazy to go collect it. They laugh, they move on. Because as long as you can do the job, the formality is just theater. This is the century of skills. Not certificates, not ranks, not institution names, skills. When I needed to learn coding, I was genuinely scared of it. Programming had felt impossible in college, but I didn't pay a certification mafia. I spent $7 on a Udemy course, 80 hours of content. I finished it. Then I moved to books, then documentation, then I built things. And that is the exact process that has worked for every new skill I have ever learned. Start with a video, understand the basics. Go to a book, read the docs, and build something real. My physics teacher once told me, 50% of any problem is solved the moment you truly understand it. He was teaching me physics, but that line has followed me into every difficult thing I have ever faced. The modern economy rewards the person who can solve the problem, not the person who paid the most to prove they once sat in a classroom. If you are a parent watching this, I know what you are willing to sacrifice. I know that for an Indian parent, money is never the question. The child is the question, always. I am not asking you to spend less. I am asking you to spend with your eyes open. If a school is charging you a premium, ask what that premium is actually buying. Not the name, not the building, the outcome. Because the most dangerous thing isn't a bad school. It is a good-looking school that produces fear instead of curiosity. Let me give you an example. After my 10th board exams in one of the most prestigious schools in the state, 60% of the students were denied enrollment into class 11. The school wanted to protect its future board result averages, so it simply threw out the majority of its own students. 10 years of loyalty to that prestigious institution and one single exam made those kids entirely disposable. Prestige is not the priority. The child is. Never confuse the two. At the beginning of this video, I told you that every 36 minutes, a student in India takes their own life. 14,488 in 1 year alone. They did not fail. The system failed them. They sat in classrooms that weren't teaching. They paid for tuitions they were forced into. They crammed for exams that were already sold. They carried the weight of a family's entire hope on one result, on one day, on one number. And when that number didn't come, the system just moved on to the next batch. This video will not fix that system. No single video will. But you, watching this right now, you can refuse to be a passive participant in it. Question what you are paying for. Question what your child is being prepared for. Chase the skill, not the certificate. Chase the understanding, not the rank. Do not walk blindly into a machine that was never designed for you to win. The system needs to change, and it will, slowly, painfully, imperfectly. But your childhood and your child's childhood will not wait for that change. So make yours.